Now, the comedian and actor Russell Brand says he identifies both with the people who voted for Brexit and those who picked Donald Trump for president because he says they're in pain and unhappy. Now, he's written a new book about his own unhappy time recovering from substance abuse, amongst other things. And I spoke to him about that, as well as Jeremy Corbyn, democracy and the Donald himself. First, I asked him if his own experiences with addiction made him pretty well qualified to proffer advice.
I'm overqualified.
And it's, I mean, this is personal, though. It's about the lessons you've learned in dealing with the multitude of addictions you've had.
It's my personal interface with an established program. The program is not a program that I've devised. The 12-step program people have been using to get clean from drugs and alcohol and various forms of addiction for a long while. This is a personal interpretation of that method to make it more accessible and to perhaps put it in a language where mystery and some of the sort of less rational and less obvious aspects of the condition and the cure can be discussed.
Well, you sure do that, because some of the title headings, your title headings, I'm not sure we can broadcast.
Absolutely.
I know, but I mean, you put it in, and that's the point, I suppose, about the 12 steps. It has to be personal to you, and you have to interpret it as how it applies to you.
I think that's one of the things that's attractive about it. At a time where people are increasingly rejecting doctrine and dogma, I'm wondering how we can feel a sense of connection. It's important, I think, to let people find their own way to, if not faith, then to connection. Because, you know, like, religion is a complicated idea in our time, but I do feel that people are finding it increasingly difficult to be satisfied with the model of living that we are offered in a materialistic, capitalistic society. So this is, like, I think, one way of addressing that problem. It's certainly working for me.
You say we're all addicted to something.
Yes.
Everybody that you know is addicted to something.
Of course, I suppose I should say here, Dermot, that I'm looking at addiction as a kind of form of attachment. Like, addiction is the kind of amplification of the kind of attachments that we all feel, the way that we identify with our job, the way that we identify with our relationships. And if some of the, if for example, your job or your relationship is causing you pain and you cannot change it, or you've tried to change it and you find it difficult, then I think that you could refer to that as a form of addiction. We are all familiar with the obvious forms of addiction: drug addiction, gambling, issues around food. But I sense that a lot of people would benefit from this program, because I think we fall into habits and patterns that are not helpful for us, and we simply don't believe change is possible, and I think it is.
So just even damaging patterns, a form of addiction, damaging patterns of behaviour, as you say, even if you're stuck in a rut at work, that in itself is a form of addiction which can lead to many, many other problems.
It's based on the idea, this book, this program, that it's possible to be content, that it's possible to be happy, that if you're unhappy you can do something about it as an individual within a community with a different belief system, rather than just like, oh, well, this is life, life isn't very good, you're supposed to work, you're supposed to be miserable, you're supposed to feel oppressed and antagonised. I don't believe that you are. And because where I had the good fortune of entering into this programme with glaringly obvious substance dependency, I've seen how the addiction has migrated through food problems, through sexual behaviour problems, and now it's really quite, I mean, sort of subtle forms of addiction, attachment in relations, caring too much about what other people think of me. But the programme is applicable in all of these areas. It's always possible to go, this is a problem, it's possible to change, I need help. That's the first 3 steps.
On the political side of it, you know, where are you domestically? Where are you with Jeremy Corbyn?
I voted for Jeremy Corbyn in the last election because I think he seems personable, and he's sort of like that simple slogan, for the many, not the few. Speaking at the Momentum event at the Labour Party conference on the subject of addiction, I admire both Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, and I feel personally relieved after my involvement with media and politics a couple of years ago that someone that's been in Parliament for decades is now the dominant voice of the opposition. It seems to me that there's been a huge transition politically, and the examples of that are obvious: Donald Trump, Brexit, and the rise of a different kind of politician, although curiously it's one that's been there for decades.
Do you feel a bit vindicated given the stick you got in the 2015 election with that Ed Miliband interview and all that? I mean, do you feel a bit almost ahead of the curve?
You're the first person that's asked me that, and I'm so glad that you have. Yes, vindicated is what I feel, because people are like, oh, you're like mad saying there's no point in voting, but I was saying there's no point in voting voting unless voting demonstrates choice or is demonstrative of choice, and now it is. And like democracy as a flawed mechanic is, I suppose, one of the ongoing arguments around Brexit. Is a lot of people would lament democracy in that particular instance, but I feel that the changes that have happened subsequently do demonstrate that I was taking the temperature correctly, if like some of my suggestions may have been inaccurate.
I mean, did you get a sense then, we're talking 2015, you referred to the referendum, the EU referendum in 2016, and was, were a lot of the dissatisfactions that you were picking up on in 2015, they came out in many, many different ways, but they came out in that referendum?
I think you're right. I think you're right, Dermot. I think that, like, both the election of Trump and Brexit, these are emotional decisions. You see, like, people are not entirely rational, and I don't mean that what's in opposition to rationality is necessarily irrational and therefore negative. I mean, we primarily in our own lives, we're motivated by love, by fear, by desire, and politics doesn't know how to access and address those ideas, except for some peculiar carbuncle flesh puppet like Donald Trump, who somehow reaches down into the visceral pit and splats out venomous rage across the stars and stripes. Or a moment like Brexit, where you feel that fracture, you feel unhappiness, like people pulling the lever on a train, like, I just want the train to stop. So I identify with people that would vote for Brexit. I identify with people that would vote for Trump, because people are in pain and they are unhappy. And I think because for years and years we've been fed the idea that it's because of immigration, otherness, other people, it's very easy to reach conclusions such as those polls demonstrated.
We've got to end it there, Russell.
It's a good chat, though, isn't it?
It's been really good. Thank you very much indeed. I could really keep going here. We just haven't got enough time to broadcast it all. We can keep chatting. But thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
For that.